All right, so this is episode 2 of I Care About Books. I'm Care from booknotification.com, and I'm joined by Graham McGaw, who is our founder of the site, and Angela Maxwell, who is not only my cousin, but she's also a librarian and has been working in this industry for, 20 years. So Graham, you were the one that assigned us The Women by Kristen Hanna, and this book was endorsed as a suggestion by Angela. So let's start with you, Graham. Tell us why you suggested this book in particular.
I suggested it because in my book newsletter, I asked the question in January, what was the best book you read in 2024? And over 60% of the responses were The Women by Kristen Hanna. It's not generally my type of book, I would think, but when you see that many readers from every gender, all saying this book, I was like, yes, perfect first book to pick for the book club.
All right, Angela, why don't you recap what you had sort of said about this book, because you had read this book long before we started talking about it for this podcast.
Yeah, so this was one of the books that my book club had chosen, and so again, it's not necessarily one of my style books either, but that's what I love about my book club, is that they suggest things that I wouldn't have necessarily picked up. And this one is a war book without being a war book, right? So it's set in Vietnam, but like I had mentioned, they really just needed a backdrop where the nurse could have some conflict as a backdrop to the actual story, which is a love story essentially. So it was interesting because we talked about this a little bit more, but if you were talking about how, you came out of this story wanting to learn more about Vietnam.
Yeah, I did. And I should have mentioned this off the hop. This episode is going to contain spoilers. So if you are just tuning in right now and you have not yet read the book, spoiler alert, we'll give you a rundown on the book and its plot line, but be prepared for spoilers. Both of you have said something already really interesting to me. Why does this not come across as a book you would have necessarily picked up? Angela, go ahead. Why would this not necessarily have struck you?
Well, one of the things is that, Kristen Hanna is just kind of everywhere. And so you kind of see that as, maybe that's like a little bit mainstream, and I tend to read things that are more in the genre of biography, things like that. So I thought that just the volume of copies that there were at the bookstore without ever having read it, I thought, well, this must be a little bit like for the masses, and so it's not really something I would have just chosen to pick up, but I definitely enjoyed it.
How about you, Graham?
For me, I've always hated history. That's really it. I find history the most, sorry to any history fans out there, I find history the most boring subject. If it happened before the 80s, I don't care. So any historical fiction, I immediately kind of zone out on. And I actually, even with this book, when we picked it, and I was excited to read it, it actually took me 2 weeks to start it, and I kept looking at it and going, wow. But then my wife read it, and she read it in 2 days, loved it, and that was like, okay, she loved it. She's telling me I love it. I'll go with it. And I will also say, kind of what you said about learning about Vietnam and all that is one thing I hate about these books is I find I stop reading to look up things on Wikipedia that I don't know about, right? So which is a good thing, obviously, but it's like it's taken away from the reading because I'm like, what is this battle that everyone seems to know about? I gotta research it. So yeah, but in short, I hate history. So.
And I think that's funny because I came away from this book being like, I need to learn more about Vietnam. Like I was like so intrigued by the history part of the book. I think it's really important that we kind of just go over a synopsis real quick about this book. This takes place, as we've been saying many, many times, during the Vietnam War, told by the perspective of Frankie McGrath, who signs up voluntarily to be a nurse with the Army. She's initially turned down by the Navy. She's also turned down by the Air Force as she's trying to get herself hired on. Is that the word I'm going to look for? Recruited, I guess is a better word. Recruited by the Army, who takes her right out of college where she has very basic nursing skills and just throws her into the deep end. She's inspired to go because her brother Finley has already enlisted in the Army. And he's actually enlisted in the Navy. I think that's an important part of this book because it sort of spoke to the generations of their family, that everybody was in the Navy. And she actually was accepted by the Army, which really frustrated her father, who is this big believer in heroes and so on and so forth, even though he wasn't able to serve himself. So we get into Frankie's story. She enlists in the Army. She's immediately deployed to Vietnam. And we learn through her perspective as to what it was like to be a woman in Vietnam during wartime, really thrown into the deep end, the people that she meets, the people that she shares her time with. And then eventually she's brought back home, and then her experiences from being in the war and all of the sort of problems, I suppose, that she finds herself in, and trying to adapt and reintegrate into society. So how did I do? Is that fairly accurate as to what our synopsis is for this book?
I think it generally summarized it, yeah.
Pretty
Like
much.
you didn't mention the love story aspect of it, but yeah.
So, okay, so you know what? Let's get right into your perspective of the book. Graham, I'll start with you because you just freshly read the book as well. When you were reading this book, you read it sort of fast as well, right? You thought it was sort of an easy read, and I don't mean that in a negative way.
No.
Tell me what your perspective was of the book.
I'd never read Kristen Hanna before. It was one of those things within a couple of chapters. I just knew it was one of those books that had me hooked. Primarily due to how she builds characters, and just I could tell with the way the pacing was going initially. I was like, yes, this is perspective-wise. I don't know if I'd fully agree with it being like a love story. There's definitely the love aspects to it and so on, but it's not like a Colleen Hoover type novel. That is the characters seeking love all throughout the book, or seeking a man type thing. But I thought it was more about, I mean, that's what I remember last one time I said, it's Vietnam's kind of like a backdrop. And so I think it was a lot more about, in a way, like female empowerment and that kind of thing. And just the life of someone who was a Vietnam nurse, basically, you know, because it was only parts of it dealt with being in Vietnam. There was so much dealing with afterwards, but with obvious PTSD and all that type of thing, you know, so.
Okay. Angela, what about you? What was your perspective of the book?
Yeah, I mean, she is a strong female character, which I like, but there was still a large aspect of it that she's defining herself by how other people, and particularly how men, relate to her. So she had a lot of strong relationships with her female friends, but that's not how she defined herself. She was defining herself as, does this man love me or not? Will I succeed in forming this relationship or not? And so they made her a hero, but I think that was kind of overshadowed in a way because she still needed a man to be who she was as a strong character.
If I can just comment to that, Angela, I totally agree. And we see that because it starts so early in the book with wanting the adoration of her father. Right. So it does eventually become that romantic love, but it starts familiar. Like it starts with her father having this, you know, whole wall full of photos of the war heroes of their family, and her wanting so much to be, you know, someone her father could be proud of. So I agree with that totally, that, you know, there is that definition of who am I, you know, and who am I going to be when this person loves me, and what I've done for them to make them love me. So apologize for interrupting. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I mean, she has principles, but then at the same time, she's eventually convinced to throw out those principles. And we're meant to feel like that's because of the war, and how war changes who you are, and how it kind of says, you know, there is a finite amount of time we're on the earth. So if we can die at any time, and that's, you know, something we're facing every day, then why am I holding on to something that could ultimately lead to me being unhappy in the short time I have here? So that, to me, like, if you're going to make the strongest of female characters, that was a bit of a challenge to accept, that she's like, okay, well, you know, even though I know he isn't going to love me past this war, if we make it out of here, I still commit to this relationship.
Did either of you find the book to be predictable?
Yes. I mean, I will like to keep on topic in regards to the whole love aspect of things and all that. I'm going to jump ahead to the ending. The ending where she meets Jamie, was it right? At the end, that took it down a whole star rating for me because, like I said, I thought it was about female empowerment, like to a strong degree, and it was a flawed character. But with the ending, it just like it almost like spat and all of that. It was like after all that, she still needed a man, you know. And I'm like, no, like it's all about that. So that was a big. That was predictable. I knew that was going to happen. I thought that I actually did get surprised by quite a few things. Like I thought early on in the book when she was waiting at the plane for I'm so bad with names. With what was the other love interest's name? The one that.
Rye?
Yeah. When she was waiting at the plane, when she went to his place and I thought he was going to be married, but then it ends up he's dead, and that caught me big surprise and so on. So most of it, no, I didn't find it. Just that ending, I found too predictable and not good.
But they still did he's married. It was just a different character.
Oh, it was, and that was definitely like, yeah, that was, you know.
Well, I will say, while I was reading Kristen's story, she became predictable in her patterns. So nobody had a name until they were going to play a bigger role. And I started to learn that very quickly in the beginning of her story, that everybody was sort of faceless, sort of nameless. But if she name dropped, so by the time she name dropped Henry, I was like, oh, okay, so he's going to play a bigger role in this book somewhere, somehow. So I found that just from Kristen Hanna's sort of artistry in the way that she works. So I found that to be a little bit predictable, because I was like, as soon as Frankie has an interaction, and Frankie, I should have mentioned, is the protagonist. As soon as Frankie has an interaction with somebody where a name is exchanged, that character somehow is going to play a role. And we were introduced to Henry fairly early on in the book, and he came back later on. So yeah, that was something that is just by the author. I will mention, though, that my first love, of course, is music, and I really do think we need a Spotify playlist for the epic music that was listed all throughout the book. I think I read Come On Baby Start My Fire by The Doors. I think that was mentioned probably 8 or 9 times throughout the book. She made a lot of really cool references to the music, and I thought she did an excellent job of really trying to sort of showcase what life was like in the 60s, not just in the Vietnam War, but I mean, from Frankie's perspective, being from an upper middle class family who lives on the island, on the outskirts of LA, what was kind of going on through their perspective. And I did see, Graham, we're going to talk about this one critique that you had sent me earlier today about the book. Yeah, we are seeing a narrow-minded view of what the world is around Frankie, because we're not looking at it through anybody else's view. We're looking at from a very privileged upper middle class daughter who has a very obscured view of what the world really looks like. So if Kristen Hanna's sort of description of what the 60s were like, that's kind of exactly what I figured Frankie would sort of see America like. What do you think?
Well, I know what you said about the music, that my wife actually played the songs mentioned as she read it, because she found that really added to the vibe of it and so on. So it really helped her get a better feel for the times in the book. So I thought that was really neat, you know.
And what do you think about this critique that you had sent me earlier about there had been that sort of flippant line, those dirty hippies? The person who had critiqued the book said, it just seems so flippant for Kristen Hanna to regard, this whole group of people as the dirty hippies. But I can't imagine Frankie referring to them as anything else.
Exactly. You always get that thing with authors where they might be speaking through the characters and so on, but that type of thing is the character talking. You're right. That is whether or not Kristen Hanna actually thinks that type of thing. That's a character talking. That's the way that they were treated in book. that was the story, so that's why they would be that way, So yeah, it's like and I know Kristen Hannah sat and spoke with many Vietnam female veterans prior to writing the book. So she probably learned that type of thing from them. This is a mindset back then. I'm sure they don't think that now, but obviously back then that was probably what they felt like. So I think that does encapsulate the feeling of someone who went to Vietnam and then came back and saw the way America was reacting to it, encapsulated it very well.
Yeah, for sure. Angela, what do you think of the lens being from like from Frankie's perspective? So like the lens on America, the lens on what the Vietnam War was like. What do you think how Kristen may have interpreted that through Frankie's eyes?
Well, that was all around the hero wall, right? And so that was where we were first introduced to all the men on her dad's wall. And she just wanted to be on her dad's wall. So she thought, well, if I just do what all these other men do, then that's the place that I'll earn in the world. And that's why it was so difficult for her in that struggle, especially when she had come back, was I still don't have that hero role. I didn't earn it, even though I did this difficult thing. So, and one of the things I liked about her character, even though she is, as you say, upper middle class and whatever, a lot of times in fiction, what they'll do with the characters who come from that background when they get faced with those challenges, like holding someone's leg while it's being amputated and things like that, they can't handle it. And she did kind of right away. We didn't have to go through that, part of the story where it's like, oh, I'm going to throw up. It's like, no, you have to. It was truncated. I mean, she didn't want to, but yes, you have to do this. And she got adapted to it very quickly. And so for all those reasons, I mean, she should have, it was a voluntary thing. She wanted to go, and she did a good job when she was there. And yet she still wasn't recognized, particularly by her father, by all of America, as that hero that she wanted to be.
And I think that was probably for us, the readers, we could have never known that was how women who were nurses in Vietnam were treated when they got back to America, because that is such a poignant point of this story, is that when they were brought back home, how all of America really just didn't treat women like they had any role.
I mean, they didn't treat men who came back from Vietnam very well either, but
absolutely. So let's talk about the characters for a second. Did you have a favorite character in the book?
The two other women, obviously, they were fantastic. It was just a pity that I felt they didn't get as much time as they should have. A lot of there was like a sisterhood there, but I really don't feel like it was more like they were telling you it was a sisterhood than it came through, but they were two of my favorite characters, I think. And I wish we'd seen more of them, because it was kind of like what you were saying about the names and so on there, where they would just disappear until needed again, and then disappear until needed again. And I'd like to see, you'd hear little bits and pieces about what's going on with them, but I'd like to have seen more in-depth look into them, because I really like those characters.
Angela, what about you? Favorite character?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Frankie was the only character that was really well developed. The other ones were all background. So it's hard to have a favorite character in this sense, because it was very much, okay, we need to get Frankie to be less uptight. So let's get her less uptight friend to invite her to a party where she can kind of let loose. So they just have these kind of one-dimensional roles of pushing the character forward.
I liked Coyote. I'm just going to throw that out there. Coyote was one of the chopper pilots in Vietnam. And I just thought, I really wished I had seen that storyline develop. That was the one where I was like, oh. Yeah. What I thought was interesting about this book, I keep picking it up for depth perception. So people know this is a 500-page book. It's almost 500 pages. It is. Yeah, it was a quick read. I was able to do it in a couple of days as well. But what's really cool is that it's separated into two parts. So I'm going to get your perspective on the split in the book, because we have Frankie's life where she decides to go to Vietnam, and she's there. She's training as a war nurse, but then also part two. And part two, I don't know if I was prepared for what part two was really going to offer us. So I'll go ahead, let you talk, Angela. Tell me what you thought about the book being split into two parts.
Yeah, well, you probably should start with this, because I honestly, the part two didn't stick with me, right?
Okay.
enough ago that the part I remember is really, I mean, obviously I remember her re-encountering the guy she thought had passed away, but other than that, I mean, I don't remember exactly how I felt about the split because I don't really remember where that happened. And yeah,
Well, that's interesting though, that the first part really did resonate with you then.
Yeah, more so than the second half.
Okay, all right. Graham, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I like to split because I wasn't expecting that. I thought the entire was I hadn't read anything about the book and stuff, so I expected the entire book to basically be her in Vietnam, and so I was kind of surprised. Okay, and it dealt with the post-Vietnam world, and I thought that was I like that, like, because it was showcasing not just a woman in Vietnam, but everything afterwards. Like you said, all the struggles she had. Just trying to be accepted, trying to be appreciated for what she did and not getting that from a family or things like that. Try to deal with everything like the PTSD she was dealing with, trying to live a normal life that, so many people in the military just struggle with, like even to this day and so on. So I thought that was quite good. It covered a lot of different things. I don't think it went as in depth as it could have. And she did kind of bounce around a lot, but I remember there was just one scene in particular where it really stuck out to me, where she said, I forget the exact wording, but it was something like she started chronicling her life and everything she'd been through, and then she's like, I'm only 27 years old or some age like that, and that was like, wow, yeah, she really has been through so much. It might have been even younger, but I remember it was just like, wow, she's been through so much, and that's I actually really did like the second part and just trying to see her get into normal life, and that's what I found. I was rooting for the character more, and so I was more cheering it on, hoping she would get that happiness she's seeking for. So I like that part.
I have to applaud Kristen Hanna for not being afraid of, turning Frankie into everything that can potentially happen with PTSD, right? I mean, we don't really get to the underbelly of, how terrifying, how awful PTSD really can wreak havoc on a person's mind, body, and soul. So I will give Kristen Hanna some props for that, because and I'm just going to preface by saying, like, Graham, I'm glad you called out the ending, because I was really impressed that Kristen Hanna, created this character who ended up with addiction struggles and dealt with, terrifying nightmares, and even her, trigger warning, her suicide attempt partway through the second portion of the book. And I felt for the first time that I was reading a really real book, like a really real encounter, because that to me seemed to make sense. Like, you are overseas in this war-stricken country, and rockets are raining down on you while you're trying to save people's lives. I can only imagine that coming back from that would certainly be cause for many of the things that Frankie experienced during part 2. So I will say that, Graham, you're right. Like, with the ending being about Jamie, I was like, oh.
Yeah. It did not need that at all. Because, like I said, she had been through so much, and everything was good. She had finally did it all on her own, basically, without the need of any help for the first time in her life. And then suddenly she has this man, and it's like, no, come on, you don't need that.
Was there any particular scene maybe throughout the book that stuck out to you, the kind that, after you put the book down afterwards, you go, right? And I'll give you an example if you need mine first while you think about it.
Yeah.
Because mine was definitely when she was drinking and then got behind the wheel of her car and was headed towards the bridge and narrowly missed a man on a bike. And I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
Like, I really thought that by the way the book had been written and the way that it was rolling out, that I thought she was headed right for the bridge and that's where she was going to end up. So I was actually like, oh man, like, you're not defined by your mental illness. You know what I mean? You don't become your mental illness. She is suffering from PTSD, but she saw this man on the bike and she slammed on her brakes. So no matter where her grief had taken her, where her stress or her trauma had taken her, she still had so much hope for human life that she veered away so as to not. And the first thing she asked about after she came to in the hospital was, is he okay? And I thought that was so great from Kristen Hanna, because it wasn't this selfish moment of Frankie's. You know what I mean? Like, she was still so much in caring and in tune of human life. So that was the moment for me.
I don't know. No, I don't think I have one. I mean, as I say, it was months ago I read the book, so I don't have a moment that really sticks with me now.
I do remember, like, as you asked that, there was two things that stuck out. One that I still think about and research on. The other is just, it came to me as you were saying, just it was in the hospital in the second part of the book where she was making, all these mistakes. She was battling with the drugs, all that, and it was just, she was really fighting. She was underwater fighting to get up, but just struggling and going down more and more. Just kept making mistakes, and as she kept getting into more pills and stuff like that. And I just thought that was very well written and covered, because that is the way it is for people. And I thought the whole mental attitude of that and all the issues she was having was just very well written, I thought, as well. Because no matter what she kept doing, she just kept messing up, and she'd been reckless, and she thought she had the best of intentions, but she was making all these mistakes, breaking the law and everything. I thought that was all good. So,
Graham, you've got some critiques of the book for us. Why don't you read some out for us? Give us some highlights
from readers.
Sure.
Well, readers, everyone I heard loved it. Like someone, Anne Marie said it was an eye opener about women's nurses during and after the Vietnam War. Daniel said, he doesn't usually blindly recommend books, but he's been doing that with the women. It's different from other Vietnam War stories. He likes how it focuses on how women were affected by the war. Christina said back in 1985, for her MA in English, she wrote a thesis exploring America's involvement in Vietnam through fiction. And since then, she has two of the finest novels about Vietnam she considers. One is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and the other is The Women, So it's really resonated with a lot of people. And even like I had some emails from people who the family were Vietnam vets. So they really enjoyed reading the book and then talking to their parents or whomever afterwards about that, having understood a little bit more about what they went through. And so many of those people said that yes, this book did to a degree cover what some of us went through. So
okay, and you've got some critiques though of the book. You sent me one today. We should talk about this because this particular critic was not a fan of this book.
Yes, that was the Slack, right? Sorry, what was that? Slate? What was the?
Slate. Yeah.
I can't even find it now. Give me just one second.
It was rather scathing, Graham. When I was reading it, I was like, "My gracious!" This person compared it to Colleen Hoover's "It Ends with Us."
Yes, Rebecca Onion at Slate. She wrote, "It's the biggest new novel of the year. It's almost unreadably bad. The Woman is like if Colleen Hoover wrote a Vietnam novel," and she was. Not a fan of the book, was she? It was a very, very negative piece, which I thought was going to look like a hit piece, basically. But
an exception that proves the rule. One person has to not like it.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I mean, I'm not going to take away from Rebecca's opinions about the book necessarily, but you can't please them all.
I don't know Colleen Hoover, so I'm interested now to say, well, what's so wrong with Colleen Hoover?
I read Ends with Colleen Hoover. Like this piece just felt like, how like I'm a complete book's opinionated, but I'll never tell someone this is a bad book, this is a good book. I'll say I didn't like this book, but that's it. This person is out there saying this is a horrendous book, and it's just extremely negative. Just everything they cover. It just feels more like I said, it's almost like they just want to get attention by hating on this popular author. So
yeah, it's trying to be different. But
yeah.
Sometimes I am really surprised. I'll read a book that I enjoy and then I'll read the reviews and they're overwhelmingly negative. And then it just kind of throws me for a loop. And I was like, but I liked it. You're feeling there's something wrong with you. But
I find it the other way because, like I said, if I like a book, I don't like a book, that's fine. If you like the book, but there is some books I have read that I feel are objectively bad. There is no one that can like it. And then I go on a website and I see all these positive reviews. And like I said, everyone has their own opinion. I'm fine with that, but I'm sitting there going, is wrong with you? Like, I'm sorry, but how do you like this? You know, there are some books like that. This book was not that. I can see if people don't like it, that's fine, but to have major problems with it to where you're comparing it to one of the worst books ever read and written and all that, no, that's just silly and looking for attention, which she's getting. It's Reddit, all that, sharing it like crazy. They like to jump on things like that too, so they're all hating on it. So
I did want to mention about this book while people are reading it, if you're thinking about picking up and reading it, even though we've spoiled the ending. Kristen Hannah stays away from swearing. There's only one F-bomb in the whole book. The closest she gets to it is saying shit, and even at that, it's very, very infrequent throughout the book. I'm not one way or the other about swearing in books, but I did notice it. There was not much swearing whatsoever in this book. And I don't know if that was surprising or a breath of fresh air. I don't really know where I'm going with it, but I do know that I took notice of it, that there was not a lot of swearing in this book. Did you notice that?
I didn't specifically, but now that you brought it up, I am very strongly opinionated on this, because there are a lot of authors who say, you know, that's the way they would have spoken and there's no other way I can write it. And I don't agree with that at all. I don't think you can, that you have to use the language they use, like foul language in particular, to encapsulate a character who may have spoken that way. And so I've read a lot of books that have been ruined by that type of language, because it's not something enjoyable for me to read. And I say this knowing that the next book we're going to be talking about is every other word. So it's kind of night and day different. And so I definitely want to prepare readers, if they're going to, you know, go forward with the next suggestion, that they have to be ready for that.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because while we're on the talking about curse words, there are some lovemaking scenes in this book. But again, they're very implied. You know, like she does kind of get a little saucy. She turns the temperature up a little bit, but it is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Give me a word here, an adjective to describe how it's kind of background noise. It doesn't take the spotlight.
You just call it PG, right? So you read this is because there's nothing in it that you wouldn't give to your mom to read, right? And
that's a great way of putting it.
Some people, I'm thinking of my mom specifically, right? My mom gave me The Secret Kept because the word hell was in it too often and she couldn't handle it. So she's like, you have to take this from me. And so, I mean, I'm looking at that as my standard of mom will read this, and that book that the women is something that my mom would read. So yes.
What about you, Graham? Did you notice that when you were reading it, that it was pretty tame?
no, it's fine. I didn't notice that, and I don't notice if there's like this novel, but I don't notice if there's 80% of the book is swearing or the 0% of the book. I have people all the time email me and be like, I'm interested in reading this book by, Bills of Prey by John Sanford. There's swearing in it. And I could have just finished reading the book and I'll be like, I don't know. It's just one of those things, because I think a large part of that is just because I grew up in Scotland and swearing was an everyday thing. So I don't actually notice if there's swearing or not. I don't pay attention at all to it. So I am the worst. If you want to ask me if something's a clean read, I'll be like, no, I will tell you, I do notice the sex scenes because I usually can't stand them. So I was very glad that Chris, now, like you said, she did it in a casual way where it was happening, but it wasn't a big deal. And that was good because Frankie did have to deal with all those issues in regard to making love, legitimate stuff. And I thought she handled it in, yes, a very kind of way where it's there, it's part of life, and it wasn't focused on it. It wasn't 50 Shades of Grey, So
all right. Okay. Well, Howby, this is the first time that we're meeting talking about a book. So why don't we give it out of bells, because Book Notification has a bell for the icon on it. Let's do it out of 5 bells. Go ahead.
No, we have to do it out of 10 bells.
10 bells? Want to do 10
yes,
bells?
Because
10 bells, that's a lot of bells.
Yes, but more people prefer 10 stars or 10 bells in this case over 5. So that's
okay. So we'll go with 10. Angela, how many bells out of 10 would you give this book?
7.
7. All right. How about you, Graham?
before the podcast started, I actually would have said 8, but enough criticisms have been brought up that, and I've thought about it more, that yes, I would actually also go 7. I think 7 is very, very inaccurate.
I'm going to give it 6. I'm going to give it 6 bells out of 10. I'm glad I read it. It makes me very fascinated to read more about the Vietnam War, about the things I didn't realize I was so ridiculously ignorant of. Like I'm very fascinated now to go and read more. But I would recommend it to my mom. And my mom and Angela's mom are very similar women. So I think that my mom would enjoy it a lot. But I found it to be, I didn't find it to be a very challenging book. And I don't mean that in that the themes are not things that will resonate with you, but in terms of reading through the book, it was very straightforward for me. This was a story. You know, you weren't peeling back layers. It wasn't a puzzle box. It wasn't a think about it later and maybe try and dissect some themes out of it. It was very, very straightforward. Sometimes I really like a challenging book where, you know, I'm taking a shower the next day or making dinner or driving in my car. And I'm like, except maybe what if? And I didn't seem to find that with this book. So I'm giving it a solid 6 out of 10 bells.
I thought it lacked a bit of depth in the first part too, where she was, getting in there in Vietnam and so on. It kind of jumped in large parts from her being completely lost, no idea what to do. And then the next chapter, it's a month later, and she's a pro at it, and a whiz. I found that was kind of. I understand why authors kind of do that, but I felt that lacked. It was lacking some depth to those areas too, to some character development in regards to how she just became so good at things, and so I think that's something the book could have did more of. Like I know it's 500 pages, but it could have done with some more depth.
That was a very thick book. Graham caught me the other day using it as a desk for my laptop.
Shouldn't you be returning that to the library now? How long do you have?
I do. I'm actually, it's due back tomorrow. So that's Kristen Hanna's The Women, book number 1 for our podcast, I Care About Books. And as promised, at the end of the episode, we get our next assignment. So Graham, I'm going to let you give us the assignment. And Angela, you've already read this book.
Yeah, so the next book is, the author Percival Everett. He is everywhere right now thanks to the success of his novel, James. It's won a Pulitzer Prize, Kirkus Prize winner. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I don't want to cover that book, though. I want to read another one of his, which is called Erasure, and it's actually his most read novel on book notification, and it was adapted into a movie, so even better, we get to read a book, then watch a movie. So I'm down with that. It was on lists such as Atlantic's Great American Novels and the New York Times 100 Best Books of the 21st Century. This was written too back in 2001, I believe. So it's, from what I understand of it, it's known for its sharp satire on race, identity, and the publishing industry. But it's ahead of the curve in regards to the themes that it covers because it was back in 2001. So I'm looking forward to reading it and then watching the movie it was adapted into in 2023, American Fiction.
Angela, as soon as I told you what Graham had up his sleeve for this book, you got through it pretty quick.
I cheated in that I bought it as an Audible and as an ebook. So I use the Whisper technology, so you can listen to it, and then when you switch to your ebook, it moves the bookmark. So if you want to get through something fast, that's kind of the way to do it. So if you're reading, obviously you read faster than you listen, but when you don't have time to sit and read, you can do other things while listening. So yeah, I got it through it in a day, and it's also very short. It's only 300 pages. But I
love your definition of short.
I very much challenge you, Graham, to say you didn't notice the swearing in this book when you're done with it, because there were pages that were just fuck you, no fuck you, no fuck you, no fuck you. And that part I listened to on Audible. I'm like, okay, will this end? So it's a good book. And then in the middle, there's a book within a book. So the main character is an author who is trying to write deep fiction, deep literature, and is not getting any traction. So he writes something that's popular as a kind of a parody. And that's what you get to read all of in the middle of this book. So yes, I did capture a little bit of because the book within a book is very difficult to get through because it's very very difficult. But that's the part that I captured for you, Carrie. I'm like, this is so enlightening, and it's rough. Okay.
Okay,
So,
good to know.
but the actual book is good. So you have to kind of endure because it makes sense. There's a reason why it's written that way. So it's not just gratuitous everything.
I love that. I had to pull this up while you were chatting there, that you got one of these. A congratulations, you're all done. That's just not something you get from
So
like
I
the
was
hard copy
book app
books.
shopping. So I've been testing out some different book apps because I wanted to know, the thing I've been using Library Thing. That's my main go-to book app. That's where I catalog my library. But what it doesn't do for me is tell me how many pages I read in a year. And so that's why I signed up for Bookmori, and Bookmori gives me, when I say I've finished, it gives me the little yay, congratulations thing. So I think that's supposed to, encourage you or whatever. That I find it funny. But I'm trying to see what different apps have different functionalities. Library Thing will tell you based on, the different heights of different monuments in the world, how high your book stack compares. So that I think is a pretty cool feature.
I think we need these, Graham.
Well, the first thing I'm doing, I've made a note while Angela was talking there that is when you're on book notification and you mark a book read and you put the end date, fireworks are going to go off to kind of celebrate that. So I like that idea. So we actually have that in our internal system where when we finish a big task of an author audit, it's a huge achievement, and then nothing would happen. It just, you're done, you mark complete, you move on. And I said to the lead developer and co-founder Frank, I was like, this is boring. We need something crazy like fireworks. So he actually set something up so that when you hit that mark complete button, the browser just fills with fireworks, and it's the greatest feeling ever. So I'm going to add that to the top of the list, that when someone marks a book complete, fireworks go off.
I'm going to solicit all publishers that at the very last page, something like pops out at you.
Well, it's 2025. I'm sure that's something that's possible. And Angela, how was the narration for the book? Sean Criston did that, right? Are you happy with his narration of the audiobook for the ratio?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
Audible only hires professional voice actors. And so, there are times when someone will give negative critiques towards the voice, but it's very well done. So particularly the book within a book, when he has to, use the stereotypical language, and just does it, just nailed it.
excellent. That's good.
Now, just so everybody listening understands, these two prefer their audiobooks, and I'm the one that's still getting the hard copies. But that's true for both of you. And I really love this about that with you guys, that you run and listen to books.
Yeah, I read ebooks and audiobooks. I have two on the go at the same time. I love both equally, but
Right.
Yes, I run, and yeah.
I'm a bit of an addict, and I use audible.com. Don't judge me, just because they have more selection than audible.ca. And I keep getting these reminders, please switch to audible.ca. But they have massive sales, and they just had one on this month. There were a lot of things on my wish list that were 86% off. And I walked away with 20 books for $86, and I felt like I robbed Audible. I was so happy. I'm just dancing around my house. And now I have 91 titles in my library that I haven't yet read. And most people would be daunted by that. I'm like, give me a couple months, I'll get through it.
Well, I sometimes use Audible, but I actually primarily use the library. I use the Libby app for my audiobooks. And the best thing about the library here, and I believe it's all over the States, is your library card gives you access to all the different libraries. So even though my home library is Kingston, because that's where I live, I actually get access to various other libraries in Ontario, like Burlington, Hamilton, London, Mississauga, and Ottawa. So it's kind of cool that, because if it's an audiobook I want and Kingston doesn't have it, I get to just check Burlington or London, Ontario, and it can be there. So yeah, I do use Audible as well to buy some new releases, but older books, I always stick with the Libby app.
And to circle back to the women, it is so well received by so many readers right now that when I went to reserve the book, I couldn't. It was already checked out for most of the local libraries. And when I tried to renew for an extra couple of days on the book, I couldn't do that either. I actually had to take my book physically back to the library and check out a different copy of it. So certainly, I think everybody should give it a read. I think it's one of those books that's going to make it on those lists, right? Like it's on the list of books you should probably read before you die. It's one of those books. Agreed?
You can't give it 6 bells and say that. I don't know. That's
I think you do. I think you do,
Yeah.
because sometimes it's like saying you've never watched Pulp Fiction. Whether or not Pulp Fiction is a masterpiece, it's kind of one of those movies you just have to watch, because then you can join the conversation around the water cooler.
That
I'm
is
saying
true.
you should read something by Kristen Hanna.
Yeah,
The next book, Percival Everett's Erasure. Am I saying it right? Erasure, sure, right?
It's a ratio, yeah.
Erasure. And that's what we're going to be reading next, and that's what we'll be chatting about next in a few weeks right here on I Care About Books, the podcast from booknotification.com. Huge thank you again, Graham McGaw, our founder of the site. And Graham, thank you again for all your insight on today's book, and then of course our next challenge. And Angela darling, thank you again for all of your insight and how fast you read. I'm sure that by the time we get to the end of the next podcast, you'll have already read the next assignment.
Whatever it is, let me know.
Make sure you sign up online and check it out, booknotification.com. And of course, as always, get notified.